here today to talk about the digital royalties debate. And given that this went headline news based on 3 tweets sent by Nigel Godrich and 2 reply tweets sent by Tom York last year, the digital music debate is actually quite complicated. I suppose what those 5 tweets and the resulting online conversation told us is that there is a lot of concern in the artist community about the money that artists are receiving when their content is consumed on digital platforms, and especially the streaming platforms. And I think the conclusion we could take is that the artists generally feel that they're simply not being paid enough. So that poses the question, is that because the streaming services themselves aren't paying enough to the music community for the content that they exploit? However, I think that all the streaming services in the room would probably want to point out that most streaming services, if not all, are already handing over the majority of their revenues to the music industry. Most streaming services are also currently loss-making. However, I think it's interesting that in the last year, in the main, with perhaps the exception of Pandora, which is a bit of a case on its own, and possibly YouTube, which has always enjoyed particularly favourable royalties from the music industry, and as a result of that is, I think, experiencing a bit of a backlash at the moment. But if we put Pandora and YouTube aside, the record companies, in the main, have been very supportive of all the streaming services, even as this royalty debate erupted in the artist community. It seems that for the record companies, for the time being at least, they are happy with the monies they are receiving from Spotify and Audio and Deezer, etc. Now, if you're a cynic like me and Billy, you might conclude from that perhaps the problem here isn't what money the streaming services are paying into the labels, perhaps the problem is what are the labels paying on to their artists. I sense in the main, most artists are pro the streaming services. They recognise that for all of the challenges, there's a lot of opportunities too. It's worth making this work. However, there's a lot of confusion in the artist community as to exactly how digital deals are done and how digital royalties are calculated. There's a lot of secrecy in the way these deals are being constructed in the last 10 years. Who is paying what to whom? What are we licensing directly and what are we licensing through the collecting societies? And why is there a difference? Why do we sometimes do it one way and sometimes do it another way? Sometimes the labels do it one way, sometimes the publishers do it another way. Also, which streaming services do the major record companies have equity in? And how big is that equity? And when these services float, which some of them likely will do in the next 2 to 3 years, how much money will the majors make and what is going to happen to that money? So perhaps something else our panel could help us do tonight is to begin to just demystify the way these deals are done and the way the royalties are collected, calculated and paid out.
I'm going to read from a prepared statement because I'll be putting this up on Facebook later this evening. And it's basically a response to a blog post by David Byrne, who last Monday posted on his own website a very interesting critique of streaming under the title, How Will the Wolf Survive? Can Musicians Make a Living in the Streaming Era? Now, I think this is very timely because for the 2nd year running, you may know this, Merlin has seen the amount it pays to rights holders from streaming alone more than double. And this evidence suggests consumers are warming to the idea of paying to hear music on demand. And if that's so, then I think we should all be encouraged that the record industry has begun to address the issue of how to make money in the digital age. The challenge for artists then is how to ensure that we get a fair share of this digital pie. Now, the internet revolution has had a disruptive effect on all kinds of commercial activities. It's not just the music industry, from book selling to share trading. But so far, as far as I know, it hasn't actually killed a creative industry dead. There's still, people are still able to make a living. Instead, what we've witnessed, certainly in our industry, are the latest chapters in a long process of technological evolution. Ever since Thomas Edison invented the phonograph in 1877, innovative ways of making music available to consumers have come and gone, and streaming is simply the most latest format. What has not changed is the need for content. And David Byrne, in his thought piece, worries that streaming on demand could have an effect similar to overfishing, depleting the resource that the record industry depends on. However, unlike fish stocks, human creativity is not finite. Our ability to emotionally engage with a piece of art means, I believe, that there will always be a market for creativity. Technology has changed, formats have come and gone, but through all this upheaval, content is still king. And as long as that remains so, I believe there will always be a way for innovative artists to make a living. Now, Byrne likens on-demand streaming to a better, cheaper, faster food distribution network that not only eliminates the small delis and grocery stores, but eliminates the farmers as well. That's what he says, that's a direct quote. And obviously the first part of that statement, the eliminating the small delis, brings a chill to all of us who've spent many happy hours browsing in small record stores. We feel their loss deeply. But this significant change in the means of distribution of music doesn't necessarily betoken the end of recorded music per se. Byrne, also in his piece, he asks, why would you ever buy a CD or download again if you can stream a track on demand? Now, let's not trouble ourselves with the ability of artists to keep some tracks off of the streaming services and make them available only on CD or download at gigs or however, and get to the nub of the question, which is this. Is it better in the long run to receive a one-off payment for your work or to receive a payment every time your song gets played? At the moment, where we are currently with streaming, I should imagine the argument is probably with the former, that it's better to physically sell a CD. But as consumer habits change and artists become better at negotiating their way around the new digital business model, I wouldn't be surprised if the latter, the idea of being paid every time someone listens to your song, becomes as lucrative, if not more so. Now, unfortunately, I'm afraid there's no way that YouTube and Spotify and the rest of those services are simply going to go away. That particular genie will not go back into the bottle. And if we as artists choose to fight on that ground, we will look both self-serving and naive. Now, this doesn't mean that we should just accept the status quo as it is and move forward. Clearly, the service offered to the public free by YouTube undermines both copyright and remuneration agreements and needs to be challenged. It's clear from the figures produced by Merlin that consumers are engaging with streaming services that they are willing to pay for. And as a result, rights holders are beginning to see some serious money. Now, rather than wishing away the free music services, the question artists need to be asking is, when revenues from streaming have doubled year on year, as they have both in the last 2 years for Merlin, when revenues from streaming have doubled year on year, why aren't musicians feeling the benefits in terms of increased royalties?
It was here a couple of years ago on a panel about streaming service and the revenues that we first really brought it to the public attention that we were paying 50% of our revenues through to artists. Here tonight I'm going to tell a slightly different story. As everyone has commented, the market has really moved on in the last 12 months, but actually it's really in the last 6 months that it's absolutely rocketed. So we've been paying all of our artists, old and new, a 50% rate on streaming, which is above and beyond our contractual right to account the regular royalty, because we felt it was important to make payment levels to our artists significant in the early stages of the growth of the streaming market and to help promote its take-up. However, we have been always clear that if and when the streaming market grew to be a significant part of the business, as is now becoming the case, we would have to review that. Since the economics of the investments a record label makes does not, in our experience, allow for the artist to be paid 50% of the net, let alone 50% of the gross, as we have been doing. All of the costs that the label incurs, A&R, marketing, promotion, distribution, they all need to be covered from our sales income. And as the market share of streaming grows, that income must also bear its share of the costs. As a consequence, we are now reviewing our policy and are likely in the near future to move away from the 50% number to a number which is between that and a normal royalty number. We'll aim to find the right balance between ensuring the best possible rate for our artists and continuing to provide our full range of global services and resources to those artists. it is very likely that we'll apply that to all existing contracts, and all contracts will be negotiated at the new rates when we arrive at them. And I think that's what we're here to say tonight. It's, you know, it's a big change, it's a big statement, but I think we all need to understand how big the changes have been in this business. Streaming is now over 40% of the Beggars' global digital revenues. We've always outperformed the market, and we're certainly feeling that that's the way things are going, and we can feel it moving even faster over the course of the next year.